Hi, this is Ryan. I thought I might start vlogging, so here we go. This is not going to be planned out or anything. There's not going to be a schedule. It's just a video diary, and I don't really know what I'm doing, so whatever. No editing, nothing. Just rambling. I'm driving home from work right now. I thought I had to work at 3. Turns out I'm not scheduled. I could have gone to find an LOD, and by the way, that means Leader on Duty and not Legion of Doom. I could have found an LOD and said, I'm not scheduled today, but you want me to help out? But fuck that. I'm going home and I'm going to write. It's a beautiful day. I'm going to go on my walk. Surprise day off. Right now I am working on a novel. I have 2 novels published. They're called The King's Eagle and Melodora. You can find them on Amazon. The King's Eagle is self-published, but Melodora was published by Dire Ninja Media, which you should definitely look up. As I'm driving right now, I don't have the web address in my head, so Google it, Dire Ninja Media. They will be publishing my next book, which is going to come out in 2 volumes. The first one will be called Death Magic. The second one will be called Winter's Bones. And these are part of my Grave World series. The first part of the Grave World series is called The Death of Alan Shade. And that's comprised of Death Magic and Winter's Bones. The novel that I'm working on right now is the second part of the Grave World series, which is called The Rise of Ellie Nex. I don't know if it's going to be published in 2 volumes, like Alan Shade, or not, but probably. We'll see. And if it is, those 2 volumes will get titles of their own. I've never written a series before, and I've been thinking a lot about why. See, I'm a fantasy author, a fantasist, if you will. And I was talking to some other writers online, and we were talking about our genres and the books that we like, and all the fantasy writers were talking about fantasy books, and all the sci-fi writers were talking about sci-fi books. And I was talking about, like, Heart of Darkness and Paradise Lost and the Divine Comedy and Lolita. And somebody was like, have you read the Song of Ice and Fire series, A Song of Ice and Fire? Because I'm a fantasy writer, that's the first question everybody asks me. Have you read the Song of Ice and Fire? Though most people say, have you read Game of Thrones? And the answer is no. I actually haven't read any fantasy since the Book of Lost Tales, which is Christopher Tolkien's. Basically, he published his father's notes, cleaned up some of his father's notes about Middle Earth and his mythos, and published a whole bunch of books. And of course, Christopher Tolkien is J.R.R. Tolkien's son. But I kind of think that Tolkien ruined me for fantasy. I don't know if that sounds stupid or not. Maybe. But for me, he was the best fantasist out there for my money, and remains the best fantasist. I guess his writing just really spoke to me, really resonated with me. I feel like nothing else has resonated with me the way Tolkien's work did, especially the Silmarillion, but of course Lord of the Rings, and The Hobbit, which my dad read to me when I was a kid. We read it over a period of nights, to help me get to sleep. And that obviously has a very sentimental place in my heart. But I didn't read The Lord of the Rings until I was in my 20s. And that spoke to me intellectually. It's what inspired me, really, to actually put a lot of effort into writing fantasy. I was originally a sci-fi writer. I wanted to write sci-fi, and I wanted to be like Asimov. And that is a tall order. I wanted to write sci-fi, but I didn't want to do research into sci. I was a lot more interested in the fi part. So I realized that with fantasy, I could make stuff up. I didn't have to research anything. And once I read The Lord of the Rings, I thought, this is fantasy. It made me want to work harder. And then the Silmarillion is just unbelievable. I tried to read that to my wife, the way my dad read The Hobbit to me, but there's a lot of, names in there that aren't exactly conducive to going to sleep. I'm reading it and I'm saying Gargaroth, or no, Gargaroth, and Thoringwethil, and Morgoth, and it's like, is this relaxing? Do you feel tired? But when I read about Finrod in Maedhros, it's not tiring to me. It's very stimulating. So we didn't finish it, but I've read it like 5 times. So anyway, what I'm getting at is I don't read a lot of fantasy. Accident. Popo's out. Oh, there's an ambulance and a fire truck. Christ, what happened? I don't know. I can't tell. I'm not a rubbernecker, so I'm just going to keep driving. Anyway, I don't read a lot of fantasy. I'm a fantasist, but I don't read fantasy. And I thought to myself, why not? Why don't I read fantasy? And I gave this quite a bit of thought, and I came to the conclusion that I'm actually not a fantasy writer. I write fantasy, but I'm not a fantasy author. What I actually write are allegories, philosophical allegories in fantasy settings. So I'm not a fantasist, I just dress like one, I guess you could say. My stories dress like fantasies. Like, for instance, the allegory of the cave. You could call that a fantasy, in that, it's a theoretical setting. Unreal people, unreal place, unreal situation. Not a lot of science to it, but it isn't a fantasy story. It's an allegory, and that's the kind of thing that I write. I feel like my stories are very self-indulgent. Like, I'm always writing about me. A lot of writers, they will write their friends and their family, into their stories. But I don't do that. I don't write my enemies in and then have them killed. That just seems very petty. I mean, I get that you can have that happen and you can make it serve the plot, but it also seems like you could have that happen and, it's just an Easter egg that only you and your friends understand. Ha, I killed Jimmy, ha. But it's that's just one asshole's opinion, whatever. I'm always writing about myself. All my characters are me, or aspects of my experience of being me, if that makes sense. I don't all my characters are lonely, isolated. I talk a lot of, I deal with a lot about isolation. That's my main theme. And I write a lot about how to be yourself, from a philosophical point of view, how to be you, what we mean by the self, what the self is, what the ego is, like the Alan Shade's story is about being endemic to yourself. It's about being actually present in your situation, really being who you are instead of trying to run away from it, or instead of retiring from life and deciding that you're not going to participate in the events of your own life. And Ellie Next is really a Bildungsroman. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. It's one of those words I've only read and never heard. It's a coming-of-age story in a way, but it's set at the end of the world, and it's not like just a physical end of the world like Mad Max. It's a spiritual end of the world where people are dying physically, but their spirits are dying as well. It's a magical apocalypse, and it's about growing up and maturing, but also remaining who you are. How do you change and still be you? Which goes into the question of what is you, and that's the kind of thing that I love to write, because that's the kind of thing that I love to think about. Who am I, really? And is there an intelligible answer? Is there one answer to the question, who am I? Or is me the answer? I'm sure that, I'm just bloviating now, I'm sure that I sound like a dingus, but this is the kind of thing that I like to write about. And by the way, I don't say Tolkien, I say Tolkien, because that's the way he pronounced it, and that probably makes me sound like an asshole too. Okay, I'm home. I've got some Panda Express that I'm going to go in and eat, and I'm going to work on Ellie Next. I should be looking at the lens of the camera and not myself. Oh well. Anyway, that's it for this vlog. Stay frosty. Later.